My name is Yaron Deutsch. I was born in Tel Aviv. Actually, the only child in the family that was born in Israel. So I take a bit pride for the fact that I was born in the first Hebrew city. And it was always a pride for my whole family, who immigrated to Israel in 1976 from Transylvania, which is a Hungarian part occupied by Romania. As many youngsters, especially growing up in the 80s, you could not pick a guitar. I did it a little bit in hiding, my shy character of just having the instrument and just trying it out every time. I remember I was just obsessed to know how to play the opening of Sunday Bloody Sunday by U2. And that group and those political messages, I don't know, were just very appealing to me as a youngster, and already from very young age, 9, 10. So quite early on, that feeling of, wow, this small thing makes such a big impact, at least for me. You know, I knew the speech that Bono gave in Red Rocks by heart. And as a youngster, you just put that video, because we had video cassettes and we recorded all the clips, and you put it on, you press play, and you give the speech together with Bono in your living room. So if there are kids that play with artificial guns or they have air guitar, I was just, you know, giving the speech and then going fast to the guitar and playing Sunday Bloody Sunday. So quite early on, I had this affiliation that the guitar is a voice that is way stronger and louder, that radiates much more than just music. And because of the background from where my parents came from, such an oppressed dictatorship of Ceausescu, who was the leader of Romania, and that oppression was still present in our home. There are still things in our house that would always be spoken very, very quietly, just because you're afraid of your neighbor. There's nothing to be afraid of when you're living in such a free and open democracy like Israel is, but there are habits you will never be able to take out once growing up in such a regime. So, also including the guitar in your ability to overcome this kind of built-in oppression was a pivotal anchor in how I grew up into the instrument. And although I played by heart the solos of Mike Stern and Pat Metheny, and Steve Vai and Joe Satriani were idols for me, and Van Halen and Nuno Bettencourt, all of this was my natural, still until today, by heart material. At a certain point, you understand you're just imitating American or Afro-American originated culture, which I admire. But as an artist, I don't want to repeat something that is so natural for others. And in that sense, through my academic days, the feeling that I need actually to go away from what my teachers are teaching, because I majored in jazz, and to understand exactly how art is connected to who I am and where I'm coming from. So all that mixture of Europe, Jewish culture, politics, the voice of the 20th century, classical music, where can I find myself on that bridge? So I found my spot, and from there I just went on. You know, we are here in New York. And in New York, 100 years ago, we had here Benny Goodman. And in Benny Goodman's band, there was a guitarist called Charlie Christian. And back then, everybody in the band, when they went on their improvisation, wanted to be heard. And if you would imagine Charlie Christian just playing an acoustic guitar next to all the brass instrument around him, it would be lost, and it would have been a pity, because what Charlie Christian used to do on the guitar was just fantastic. Now, if you have these microphones built into the instrument, not as in something that is foreign, that you just put next to an instrument, imagine what sound world it opens, because the sound from the string and the wood, which is very acoustic, going through a microphone that goes through a cable, from that point until it reaches an amp, what you can put in between is endless effects, looping machines, delays, reverb, choruses, pitch shifting, you name them. So everything that developed together with the idea that music can be captured, recorded. So the more the studio progressed, the more the sound world of the electric guitar progressed. You could apply all these electronic effects into an acoustic instrument. later in the 20th century, combine all that development of jazz, blues, rock, the development of technology, but also the development of socio-political changes. I mean, I cannot think of any revolution in the late 20th century where the guitar has no connection with. And if I'm thinking about Hendrix's Stars Playing Banner in Woodstock, or I'm thinking about the Scorpions' Wind of Change when the Iron Curtain collapsed. There's always that sound of rock and roll in the air with the big changes of the 20th century. But there is also another thing. Composers of contemporary music were born in the 60s, 50s, 40s, you name it. And the ones that were born in the 60s and 70s, they grew up with the electric guitar sound in their head. So it means that when they are writing a piece of music, they don't only now hear violin, piano, trombone, they also hear the electric guitar in it. I'm going to address now the piece by Fausto Romitelli, Trash TV Trance. It is a canonic piece in the repertoire of electric guitar. And one of the reasons why the piece is canonic is, besides the fact that it is well written and composed, it has that thing which I mentioned, this layer of reference. It really smells from guitar history, but it resonates something bigger, which is connected to European aesthetics and history, where Fausto Romitelli as a composer is coming from. And maybe he never thought about it, but this is what it means for me. The futuristic movement, this notion that noise is sound, that the 20th century cannot stay only with beautiful harmonies or just pitch as a pitch, is something that Romitelli in his piece welcomes very much and absorbs it. You know, the electric guitar, how it works, when I touch the guitar strings, I close a circuit of electricity, and therefore you have less noise. But if I will release my hands, you will immediately hear the electricity, we call humming. Now, if you disconnect the cable, imagine you made a bigger cut in the electric circuit and you hear a really big buzz. If you're not touching anything, that hum will be, let's say, 20–30%. But if you put that cable into something that is not really electronic or maybe electronic, you just hear a big vroom. You know, sometimes when you hear a guitar thrown on the floor in a great rock concert or punk concert, that hum, if you just take out the cable and throw it on the ground, will be double the size. So that's what he's doing, while on the other hand, you take this seminal sound world and very performative moment that announces the piece, and you record it and loop it. So also something very contemporary, to record, loop, and stack thing, which is a very important part in the piece. We saw at the beginning this very famous YouTube clip of the lick. So much similarity, but at the same time, it is very different. So when Pat Metheny played the lick, it sounded completely different than the Coltrane moment or the orchestral. Of course, there are many parameters, but you could immediately, and that's the beautiful thing about the video, you can immediately recognize who is who, and not only by the face, how they orchestrate, how they phrase, how they play. It's not at all about being famous or known. For me, it's this thing of what makes that sound be associated with someone. But in classical music, there is the tendency to create a classical sound, a classical voice. Then the differences are becoming very small, because what is considered a correct sound often makes an outcome of similarity between performers.
But you know the funniest thing about Europe is?
What?
It's the little differences. I mean, they got the same shit over there that they got here, but it's just there, it's a little different.
Example?
And you know what they call a quarter pounder with cheese in Paris?
They don't call it a quarter pounder with cheese?
Oh man, they got the Royale with cheese.
Royale with cheese.
That's right.
I'm often being asked, what does it mean, interpretation? And I just take a scene from Quentin Tarantino's Pulp Fiction, zooming out, and I refer to the idea, what would it mean to interpret that scene? So there are two layers going on. If we take a kind of an ars poetic approach, this idea of the little differences, this is one thing, where we can be full of little differences between each interpretation, especially with canonic repertoire that is familiar. But how can we take the global thing, make it different, without harming the original? And it's easier to explain through cinema or theater. So now, if I would put in the car not John Travolta and Samuel L. Jackson, but actually two women, they might be immigrants, they might be from South America, they are both females, maybe they have a romance, you immediately go somewhere else. And they will speak the same script by Tarantino. And maybe someone will hate it, and maybe someone will love that. But you can always recognize, okay, that's Pulp Fiction. That's the script. And maybe I don't have to take most of the angles from Travolta's side and just make the jumps to Samuel L. Jackson. Maybe I can just shoot them from the front. Maybe actually I can shoot them from the driver's seat. So immediately I'm able to maintain the original that is recognizable, but offer a different perspective. And then if I take it to another layer, imagine that you have like two gangsters, but actually one is Russian and one is Ukrainian. And if you think about the political situation right now, then you are immediately creating another layer of reference, and you throw your audience to new perspectives of potential drama between these two characters that are now in the car saying the same script. But now your mind is also drifting to other places. So something like that will be very obvious in theater. Nobody makes the same Hamlet every time, or Wagner's opera. But in music, there is this kind of a strict holiness of that's how you have to do it, which creates a kind of stagnation. So of course there are the little differences, sound, time, how do I take a fermata, what will be maybe my articulation, but actually an approach to interpretation, what I call composed interpretation, where you are applying ideas of a gesture and starting to spread them around the text without harming the original, but creating a maze that creates a logic to your interpretation. So if we go back to Romitelli, for example, if he suggests the usage of a shaving machine and I use a drill, I have a drill that looks like a gun. It's immediately one reference. I have a drill that reminds every person who loves rock and roll Van Halen. I have a drill that for art aficionados will seem like, oh, this guy is just referencing now futurism, right? So now I'm already communicating with my audience in a new layer without at all changing the piece, because basically what Romitelli needs is just an engine going against the pickup. Can be an engine of a shaving machine or a drill. You know, there is a whole family of effects from chorus to flanger, etc., that basically create a kind of manipulation on the wave that once you could achieve by just recording the same part twice, because you never enter the same river twice and the same thing with playing. Now you want to take this on the road, or you want to make it compact, or you want to realize it as an instrumentalist or an instrument that can work with electronics. You have to minimize things and you start having all these effect box generated. I often try to avoid as much as I can the talk about the effects, because it gives a kind of a false feeling that, okay, the guitar is just an effect generating machine. For me, the instrument remains purely acoustic. When I try to find a nice guitar to play, I mainly check it acoustically, how it sounds, how it rings. I never use the effects to sound beautiful or to make a sound that I cannot achieve in my head acoustically as a philosophy. So in this perspective of approach, you don't think of a delay as a delay, but as a canon. And if you're starting to think in, let's say, classical methods, you're thinking, okay, if a delay is a canon, then a pitch shifter is maybe something I can use for microtonality. So this is to tell you effects are not the main thing. They are just an extension of a compositional idea. This piece, for your familiarity, the right hand is not doing anything. I mean, anything that is typical of the guitar, it's not plucking at all. All the plucks come from the left hand. The right hand is, throughout the whole piece, is just manipulating the whammy bar of the guitar. The whammy bar, what the piece is based on, is basically possible because the strings are sitting on something that is called a floating bridge. Normally a guitar, or until the 20th century, the strings were sitting on a bridge that was fixed to the body of the guitar. But because now it is floating, a string can go up or down, so it floats. The main discovery in this piece from the composer's perspective is that when you press the whammy bar, logic says that if I'm going to press it in a certain power, all the strings will have the same interval. Because let's say I apply the same power, but the interval is not similar for every string. And then you can imagine you are entering a world that you have just microtonal harmonies. So that's one hell of material for a composer to work with. Not only on this pitch world element, he mentions this Zen question of what is the sound of one hand when you clap. So what is the sound of the electric guitar when you are just using one hand? But not only these references to Far Eastern thoughts and how we think about time. If you're listening carefully to a guitar amplifier, you're going to hear that electric hum. But what happens if we will make that hum as our main musical motive? And one of the things that I'm using as an interpreter to amplify this idea that music is happening without the hands is, you're going to see me many times just putting my hands on the knees. But this act gives a kind of ritual element, which comes back to that Zen question which Billone is referencing when he comes to describe this piece. Another idea about this composed interpretation, I try once in a piece to do something that is weird. Just to, for me, it's like the Haydn Surprise Symphony. You know the Haydn Surprise Symphony? There is a moment there of a fortissimo. From what I used to read, he knew that those milliers of people that are listening, the tendency to get bored will be quite fast. So, bam, one fortissimo out of nowhere. I love that idea so much. And back to cinema, I really like it that Alfred Hitchcock suddenly appears in a scene. He walks in the back. If you know it's Hitchcock, you know it's him. You have a good smile. You understand that this parallel reality in which art happens, there is a place for reality to invade. So I do this to create a kind of attention from the public instead of going, yeah, nothing happened. I'm only one time in the piece. Immediately when the audience sees this, oh, okay, what happened there? Why do I do it? First, only because of the music. It's very powerful when the hand comes from the top. So you can do things, but they have to be rooted in a musical context. So I needed power, I needed the accent, and the reason I do this one only one time, because otherwise it will become a little bit a cliche, a little bit of a silly thing, unlike the work with the knees. So I would suggest, if we can do again the first page, please rethink how you open the chord, how you introduce them, and please let's find a way that we hear how sound transforms into a hum. So one more time. The appearance of electric guitar in chamber music already had appearances in the 60s in orchestral pieces, even if you think about Stockhausen's Gruppen. But what you would hear back then is mostly a acoustic guitar concept with more volume, because that was actually always the Achilles heel of the acoustic guitar. Just a soft instrument surrounded by an orchestral sound, it will often disappear. So basically in the 60s, with amplification being possible, you could still have that, let's say, very typical manner of guitar playing, but now amplified, so then better heard. But was it really capturing the aesthetics, the syntax, the sound world, the historic reference, even being referential? To me, a critical encounter was a piece by Louis Andriessen. Louis Andriessen is a Dutch composer, and the piece that he wrote was called Hout. That piece was for electric guitar, saxophone, piano, and percussion. And when I came across that piece, I could hear so much jazz in it too. And if you had from one side an ideas of canon, it also had tonal centers always shifting, as one often encounters in jazz. And the beautiful thing about that piece, all the four instruments were playing the same part, but 1/16th note apart. So a kind of a delay, a natural delay was going on. So felt, okay, we have everything from the guitar. We have so many formalities of composition. It is very actual. Andriessen was a very politically engaged composer, and I was familiar already with his works. One could say it is connected to European minimalism. And of course, I knew very much about American minimal music. And coming also together with my roots of European tradition, things started to feel like, oh, there's a whole world of electric guitar in classical music, but in a chamber sense. And actually that piece inspired me to start a group that is called Nickel, quite present in the European scene. And we, as a group, had no repertoire, because this is a quite particular formation that one would not typically associate with classical formations. I was always fascinated by the idea that in the 21st century, I would love that people, when they hear the word quartet, they would not immediately think about strings. And these things of putting, hey, saxophone, electric guitar, piano, and percussion, that can be quite a new quartet feeling. Not that there is something too original about this, but each has his own subjective entrance point. And as a group, we commissioned so many pieces. And all around the world, groups were starting to rise already from the late 70s, and the guitar having a very active role in that. So suddenly, chamber music with the instrument was more and more. I did the premiere of this piece together with Ensemble Klangform Wien, a wonderful piece by Rebecca Saunders that is a great example on all levels for her aesthetic. From the perspective of the guitar, many times it will be an extension or amplification to what happens on the bass drums. Many times it is connected with the trumpet and the effect of the wah-wah trumpet. Many times it is connected with an accordion on very, very high frequencies and ranges of pitches. And often it will just be in contact and communication with the vocal part, which is the soloist part that Juliet Fraser is singing. I love that thing where the guitar is not at all in the front. It's not at all on the side also being exotic. It is just something that allows the whole ensemble to bridge between the world of sonorities, the worlds of acoustic and electronic. And for that, I'm using a few devices that allow me to have a wide palette of sound world, mainly generated from the idea of synthesizing. I'm using kind of an organ effect that allows me to be 2 octaves down or 2 octaves up. I think Rebecca's writing for the electric guitar is very idiomatic. The second thing one can question is, what is idiomatic in the 21st century? So everything she writes has a very clear logic, and it works very well with the instrument. But if we know from the blues and rock and roll that the bottleneck is doing this, with Rebecca's music, the bottleneck will do this. So she uses the bottleneck to hit the strings. She's also using it to gliss the pitches, the notes, but also it becomes a percussive instrument. And that's actually the great beauty. You are part of the evolution of the language. So you are doing things that someone would say, yeah, I can recognize it's electric guitar. It's actually very fitting. And the fact that you are being a percussive player on the electric guitar is not making you a percussionist, but you're just extending what means to be idiomatic with your instrument. So the fact that you're doing such a wild palette of sound worlds and suddenly go back to the roots of what the instrument is, shows to me how caring the composer is by doing the most obvious thing in a certain moment, and at the other times just expanding the idiom and expanding the ensemble through what the electric guitar can do. The world is changing, and if you think about it from an economic perspective, groups are getting smaller and smaller. Performers are getting more and more singular in a sense. Street culture is also allowing the presence of electricity. So once we used to hear often a cellist or a violinist playing some classical music. Today, you would hear many indie artists electrifying their instrument, and often they use loopings just so that they have a background. In Romitelli, this is something that is more associated with the idea of counterpoint. You create an orchestral layer, and then you create a completely contradicting counterpointing layer, etc., etc. So it's a compositional tool. So the perspectives of what you do with looping is also different. For example, if we think about Steve Reich, my entrance to new music, like many others, you are in your academy days, the professor puts on music for 18 musicians, and you're blown away. I mean, when you hear that bass clarinet, you need to not have a soul or a heart to not melt. And of course, you go to the phasing period of Reich, again, working with tape and how they change and transform. So suddenly you see how technology is going hand in hand and in parallel with discoveries of compositional tool, because phasing, in a way, is a kind of a middle way from a canon, a more gradual way, in a sense. And Reich, through the years, developed a variety of strategies. And I remember seeing Steve Reich in Baden-Baden. The story that he told there is that he got this call from a notorious flutist here, asking him for a concerto for flute and orchestra. And he declined. And after declining, he said to himself, how could I decline such a proposal for a wonderful artist? And he had this idea, how about he will have a concerto with himself? He will play solo against himself and creating these layers. That's at least how I remember the story, and from that came the series of counterpoint. We have the clarinet, and there is the electric guitar. In a sense, it is again creating a mixture now of the layers that looping offers, but also the layers of counterpoint that we mentioned in Romitelli. So Steve Reich, being from the classical training affiliation, is bringing the two worlds together. But they are all coming from the same idea of how can we use canons and counterpoints and repetition, but with technological means that are available today. And in a way, that's just a beautiful evolution of techniques alongside technology. Klaus Lang is a composer and an organist, and also a friend. Probably the most musician in let's say in a historical sense that I'm close with. In terms, he would play in a church. He would go home and compose, and then he would travel to a festival and go to the university, give lessons, disappear for 2 months and compose something, and it will appear on my mail. I mean, a little bit this cliche that we grow up on to what is a composer. Chanson is a song, and Klaus actually orients that with the secular element of a song from European tradition of 300-400 years ago. But that's probably, again, more on his side of observation on the music. For me, what I love so much is there is this grandness, this church grandness. What he's using here is one delay unit that is tuned for 6 seconds to repeat after 6 seconds, and the other is after 12 seconds. So if you think about what it generates, it's really a quite size of a sound. So if he was thinking about all those churches and cathedrals, for me it was quite important to give the first live premiere of the piece actually in the United States, here in New York, because to me, unlike the church that Klaus heard, I have an Americana road trip in mind. Once I was asked why in this concert series that I'm curating there are no program notes. And my answer was that in the digital world that we are living in, you just Google who's Schoenberg and you have all the data you need. But what can we learn from? What was Schoenberg's milieu? And I mainly refer to interpreters because that's the world I'm coming from. And I addressed Steuermann, pianist, who was playing all of Schoenberg's premieres. And then the thought goes to, Schoenberg is very evident in our world, while Steuermann and his interpretations are not. So when I think about who's Schoenberg, of course I think about what everybody knows. Founder of Dodecaphony, the 12-tone row series, the Viennese school. But to me, I'm also thinking, oh, this explorer, this giant of discoveries in music, who was around him besides the notorious composer? Who was the milieu of interpreters that went along with him, and why are they so shadowed by that great figure? So, of course, we know why, but I'm trying to understand what can I learn from that historically, and how can I apply maybe some conclusions from that into my work.